What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. I could not be more thrilled to be talking with my special guest today. He is a NFL staff writer for The Ringer. You can find him on The Ringer NFL show over on Spotify. You can follow him on Twitter at Benjamin Solak. He wrote an absolutely fantastic piece on the Packers. The title was, "Are the Packers Issues About Scheme or Talent?" Yes. It is an absolute must read, but I could not be, like I said, more happy to be talking to him today. Ben Solak, how the heck are you doing?
Doing well, man. Life's good. Football's going. The last 6 pieces I've written have been like, so what's going on with the Rams? So what's going on with the Bengals? So what's going on with the Packers? It's just one of those years in the NFL where everybody's got something.
Yeah, McVay, Taylor, and LaFleur all kind of from the same.
They're all washed. We're moving on. Exactly. We're post Shanahan.
It's past Shanahan's system. It's all going into the garbage. Everything else is taking over. First of all, I want to say to you, I've been a huge fan of your work for an extremely long time. And there are a precious few amount of people who have the extreme, unbelievable knowledge of football in the NFL, and B, can talk about it to an audience that is either a hardcore football audience or like somebody who's just coming into football. And you can marry those things incredibly well. Like I said, I've been a huge fan of your writing, a huge fan of your podcasts, and super excited to pick your brain on the Packers today.
That's really sweet. I appreciate that. It's funny because knowledge of the game and whatever. And meanwhile, the entire time I'm writing the article, I'm like DMing Stephen Ruiz and Nate Tice, and I'm like, what's going on here? It's just like we're all idiots. And so you just ask enough questions to then get the information to the next idiot. And then hopefully eventually we all kind of know something about football. So it takes a village sort of a thing.
It really does. We all have our people that we trust when we see something where we're like, I think I know what I'm talking about here, but I really want to get a second pair of eyes. But I have a feeling you are probably on the one that more people are going to than the other way around. But we got to get into this article because it's a fantastic article. And I think sometimes for myself, who's obviously covering the Packers literally 365 days a year, we can see the trees, but sometimes we lose track of the forest. And you obviously have a pulse of everything on the NFL. So it's really fun to kind of pick your brain. And like I said, I thought you had a tremendous pulse of everything that's going on with the Packers in this article. But I want to start on the defensive side of things, which is what you did as well. And you kind of came to the conclusion that the Packers have the players, but don't exactly have the scheme, which I think is a popular take right now. But what were some of your key observations in kind of coming to that conclusion?
Yeah. And, when I made those headlines, actually, because I did like defense, they have the players, not the scheme, and then offense, they have the scheme, not the players. I literally ran it by Justice Mosqueda of Acme Packing Company, and I was like, "Hey, this is a simplification, but is this okay?" And he was like, "Yeah, probably," because there's color on both sides. Like Devondre Campbell, who played like it was an All-Pro in 2021, and the Packers paid him because he was playing well. And you're kind of like, "All right, well, Devondre Campbell had his one All-Pro year last year. He's probably not going to be as good in 2022." He's not playing as well. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I don't think he's playing poorly, but he's not playing as well. You're Rashawn Gary, your top 15 pick. He's dominating in pass rush win rate. Like, oh, great pass rusher. Run defense wise, Rashawn's maybe not what you want him to be. So there are player issues that you have. But overall, with the amount of investment, 7 first round picks on the roster, all young guys, all homegrown guys, right? Laquan Treadwell's out here. These are guys the Packers wanted. Plus your veterans and guys like Devondre Campbell and Adrian Amos and Rasul Douglas. Man, it's talented. Defense. It's a talented roster on that side of the ball. So what's our issue here? When you turn on the film, it's an issue of execution. And some defenses struggle to execute because they don't have the horses. It's not the case with the Packers. They're struggling to execute because they're confused, they're disoriented, they're miscommunicating. I feel like every game I turn on, there's at least one rep where Darnell Savage ends it turning around and screaming at somebody, right? They have just not been able to figure out how to get routes across the field to the correct players, who's falling off, who's stepping to a new guy. Like, they haven't gotten it right through 5 weeks. That Justin Jefferson game, you kind of watch, you're like, okay, well, this was not good from the Packers, but it's week 1. They don't really play in the preseason, right? The Vikings kind of play hide and seek with Justin Jefferson. This will go away. And it's just not. I mean, they're losing Daniel Bellinger. Yeah, it's just not. We got problems in terms of our communication in the back seven. It can get better. I think as Quay gets more comfortable, you'll be all right. Rasul playing the nickel instead of outside, like that's different vision. It's different keys. It's a different position. So you guys get more comfortable there, but there's an easier solution than just like waiting for the execution to get better, waiting for the communication to improve. Play man. You got Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, and Rasul Douglas. Put them on the line. 10, 20 NFL coordinators would kill to get 3 corners of this caliber so they could just play man coverage and stop worrying about all this. but that's not what Joe Barry wants to do. And there has to be a bit of a reckoning with what Joe Barry wants to do versus what the defense has been through 5 weeks. Because it's a little bit of ramming your head into a wall here at this point. Like if you look like this in week 6 and week 7 against the Jets and Washington, okay, maybe you still escape with a win. You get Detroit, you get Philly, you get some other good NFC team. I can't remember. The schedule gets good. The schedule gets tough. Yeah. It gets difficult after these next upcoming weeks. And so you have to do a risk assessment here and say, okay, do we really want to see if we can get good enough at like passing routes off in quarters, which is not even like the best way to play football in general? Or do we want to have a paradigm shift and say, let's just get our best guys against their best guys and be confident that this defense we've invested so much in is talented enough to win?
There's so much that I want to unpack here. And first of all, from a scheme standpoint, it doesn't feel like they're doing a great job of marrying the players that they have with the scheme that they want to run. And like you said, there has to be a reconciliation there between, all right, are we getting the wrong players for this scheme? Or are we not running the right scheme for our players? You're not finding new players now. So it would seem like the thing that you've got to do is obviously change up the scheme a little bit. And I definitely think too, from a man standpoint, they've got the guys to do that. And I know in today's NFL, it's really difficult to run a primarily man scheme, but like they need to be running it more. I thought one of the things that you pointed out in the article, and certainly has been a hot topic in Packerland as well, they're not playing man coverage. They don't blitz. And I think you wrote they become ultra predictable. And we saw this all over the place against the Giants. I thought both Brian Daboll and Wink used Green Bay's tendencies against them to a extremely, well done way this past week and came away with a win, obviously against Green Bay. But what have you seen from a predictability standpoint for the Packers?
Yeah, right. You brought up the point where they don't blitz, right? And then you go to a lot of these like blitz metrics, like, the Packers are third in blitzing. No, they aren't. They line 5 dudes up on the line, and then they can't drop any of them, right? Most of the teams in the league who play bare fronts, right? We talk about 5 down fronts. Philadelphia does this. Carolina does this. Detroit does this too. And even they don't have the best guys to drop, but at least some of those edge rushers, Hassan Reddick in Philadelphia, Brian Burns, Frankie Louvu in Carolina, are guys who can drop into coverage and be okay, right? We might say they're above the Preston Smith line of dropping into coverage, because when the Packers go to drop a guy, Gary never drops. It's always Smith. And he's dropped, I want to say like 7-8% of his pass snaps this year, and it's just never gone well. There was the famous drop 8 in the playoffs against the Niners where he was dropped. He was dropped against Jefferson a couple times in week 1. Like they don't have the outside linebacker body type that is sufficient to drop into coverage. So they just end up rushing all 5. And it's funny because, okay, we don't have the body type to drop into coverage, but they're really big outside linebackers. We're going to be really good against the run, and they're not. So you didn't even get the juice that would have made the squeeze worth it. You didn't even get the positive that would have helped erase the negative, because they're still soft on the edges because of the way that Smith and Gary play. So, okay, we put 5 down the line and we rush 5. We're never dropping anybody. So you don't have to check your work. You don't have to make sure, okay, are they rotating the coverage? Is one of these outside linebackers dropping into the slant window? He's not doing it. And because Eric Stokes and Jair and Rasul are 8 yards off the line, because they're trying to play this world where like, are we playing quarters? Are we playing cover 3? They have to be off the ball to do that. Okay, I don't have a linebacker dropping into the curl window or the slant window, and the corner's off. It's open. It's open unless Quay Walker is never, ever wrong. Unless Devondre Campbell is always right. That's really a lot of stress to put on your linebackers. So once I have this like free access throw now. The passing game gets so much easier, right? I have the ability to get to 2nd and 4. I have the ability to go from 3rd and 3 to 1st and 10 because I'm very confident that I have this throw. It's simple. And opposing offenses will always be able to find it and always be able to hammer it, right? It's not the sort of like matchup that like, oh, if they have a speed guy, they can do this. No. Like every offense can hit that if you're going to give it to them. So that predictability on defense with the 5-man fronts and always rushing those 5, it just gives you 6 dudes instead of 7 dudes to solve problems on 1st and 10 in the back, in the secondary, in the coverage. That's unacceptable is really the word for it. Like when I wrote about it, I was kind of trying to dance around it. And I realized like, no, like this is not okay. You have to know that in a passing league, you cannot get away with doing this. At the very least, run a game, and they do sometimes, but not enough. You have to do something to create confusion here.
It's so vanilla. And there was a part of me that at the beginning of the season, obviously they get the loss to Minnesota, but like I thought there was a piece of this where like Joe Barry was just kind of keeping things in his back pocket and being like, we can win against these teams without having to do a whole heck of a lot. And I'm going to keep things that I want to run against, Josh Allen when we face the Bills or like some of those things. But like, you're just not good enough right now to be able to do that. You've got to be, like you said, a lot more unpredictable. And Brian Daboll like just went to town and, really took to task Joe Barry in this defense last week. I thought another thing that you brought up that was really great was, and I've said this very similar. They're not eating their vegetables on early downs. Like they're having some success on third downs when they can actually get there, but the first and second down defense isn't good enough where they're not
the
actually.
Disparity is unbelievable.
First and second,
they're the best third down defense in the league, and they don't try to get to third down. What are you doing? It's it's very peculiar and easily fixable. Get aggressive on first down, and then you can actually get to a 3rd and 8. And then that's where you're really strong. That's where your coverage stuff works. It's where you actually put Quay on the line, put Devondre on the line, bluff some blitzes, get Rashawn in a one-on-one. He's such a good pass rusher. Like that works. But they're disinterested in doing the work on first down necessary to get to 3rd and 8. They're just going to wait for you to get a holding call. Wait for you to get an incomplete pass, 2nd and 10. They're not going to try. They're just going to kind of sit here and be inert. And that's what's very frustrating is like this defense is often described as being passive, this Brandon Staley, Vic Fangio background, because it's split field, because it's light boxes, but it doesn't have to be. You can be confusing. You can have coverage rotations. Like when Barry was there with the Rams and Staley, they ran quarter, half a lot with the intention of being like, let's get cover 2 over a star receiver. Let's rotate a safety. Let's change the picture of the defense. We're going to rotate. And the Packers under Barry just do not seem interested in touching that button at all in terms of changing what they look like pre-snap with the hope that they're going to disrupt you into falling behind the sticks. They just wait for you to get a penalty. Wait for Kenny Clark to win a one-on-one. It's so patient, and there's no need for it.
It's making the players do a lot of the heavy lifting. And if I'm an offensive coordinator, like I'm not so certain from just a pure scheme standpoint. There's a team, I'm sure there's a lot of bad defenses out there, but like just from a pure scheme standpoint and knowing what to expect, I'm feeling fairly confident that I know what's going to happen on the vast majority of plays. It's a lot of cover 4, a lot of cover 3. And it's just like you said, that there's not players dropping into zones. There's not corners coming. There's not safeties coming. There's no DB. I think that you pointed out like that has more than 4 rushes on the season. Like you just know what to expect, and you just can't be that predictable. And then I loved your comment. The solution is to grow up and get creative. And you've sort of made references to this already, but I love that. They just have to, they can't do the same thing over and over. There has to be an evolution at some point.
Yeah, if your solution is like, well, we just need Devondre to be better and Quay to be better and Gary to be better and Rasul to be better, it's like, okay, like sure, because you've seen Sewell play better than this, you've seen Devondre play better than this. The other first round linebacker, Devin Lloyd, is playing better than this. So like, yeah, but also like, okay, then you're better at masking the problems that the scheme is creating, right? You're just like, your players are solving more issues for you from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock on Sunday. What are you doing Monday to Saturday? There is meat on this bone in terms of defensive scheme stuff. And what's really frustrating is, one, the meat on the bone is similar to the Mike Pettin meat on the bone, which like this was supposed to solve the Pettin problem. It's like we wanted to get out of that world and we're still there. And then number 2, it's not like you hired a first-time DC. You thought like came up under Staley and like could do something creative. No, you saw Joe Barry coordinate defense. You saw him do it in your division with the Lions, and he did it in Washington. Barry's defenses were never above average, and it was a nice thing to believe that a couple years with Sean McVay, assistant head coach of the Rams, hang out with Wade Phillips and Brandon Staley was going to change things. But you made this bet, and I got to lie in it a little bit because Barry has yet to prove that he can be an above-average defensive coordinator in the league. There's just no evidence of that. You don't want to say it about a guy, but that's the long and the short of it.
No, I agree. And I think Ross Uglum put it best. I think he said something on Twitter to the extent of like, if you hire Joe Barry and Joe Barry walks through the door, that's not Joe Barry's fault. Like that's like, what is
Joe Barry's cashing a check, baby. He's
exactly.
Making money.
Good for him. Oh, super frustrating. We got to jump over to the offense though. So I think you make a great point that obviously losing Devontae Adams, losing MBS is extremely hurting this offense. And I think the best way you put it is that the field is shrinking in on Aaron Rodgers, and they're trying to expand it. They're trying to hit some of these deep shots, but they're very low percentage plays. Defensive coordinators aren't really super concerned about getting beat by it, and it's just making everything so much more difficult up front.
Yeah, absolutely. So we lost Devontae and we lost MVS, right? Because Devontae was so important, it's so easy to forget that they lost MVS. Yep. Like I saw MVS playing in the Monday night game. I was like, oh, that's where he used to be there. Right. That was important because you had not only the stress of Devontae lined up on the outside. Okay, if we go one-on-one with that dude, we're probably going to lose. We need a solution to that issue in and of itself. You also had MVS where it's like, okay, if we go one-on-one with that guy, we feel all right, but he's going to run us around a little bit, right? If we lose a rep, we're not giving up a 13-yard deep comeback. We're giving up a 40-yard shot. So there was a weight on defensive coordinators' minds in terms of the guys that were lined up outside of the numbers and their ability to get downfield. So, Steven Ruiz, I mentioned previously, was just poking around Rodgers' numbers. He was going through quarterbacks, and you could start to see that over the course of last year, or 2 years ago into last year, the outside the numbers beyond the line of scrimmage throws started to tail off a little bit. Rodgers getting old, arm's going to start to go. And then this year they've taken a big step down, and that's some the arm. The Jack Jones pick six, that ball used to be a lot faster than it was. And Rodgers kind of threw it and was like, we used to zip that thing. That thing's not zipping the same way.
Nope.
But a lot of it is the loss to the receivers. And what's admirable is that the Packers understood that was going to be an issue, and they tried to deal with it, right? Like beyond the drafting of Christian Watson, who's very clearly MVS Part 2, Electric Boogaloo, but also Romeo Doubs, who was at Nevada, air raid, we're going to throw the ball down the field. Beyond that, they clearly walked out in week 1 with a plan to get both their backs on the field, become very horizontal stretch, right? We're going to throw the ball into the flats behind line of scrimmage, throw the ball into the flats 0 to 5 yards. We're going to stretch you out horizontally, and then we're going to be a yards after the catch team. And that can work for us. We can still pull you, not necessarily the 100 yards that the field is long, but the 53 and a third yards the field is wide. And that's going to give us the space we need to then throw intermediate middle, get the run after the catch with Cobb, get the Tunyon screens going. Like this will work for us. And it didn't. And that's the tough thing is they drafted Dillon in the second round. Jones is so good. Put both of them on the field. It should stress defenses out. And it just didn't work. There wasn't enough there in terms of, your AJ Dillon targets weren't really paying off for you. Dillon just not enough in terms of making guys miss one-on-one in space. He's just such a contact seeker that it's not intuitive for him to take a flare route with 2 blockers. Then here comes the safety and okay, got to slip past the guy, and he just wants to hit him. It's just what he knows, So that the yak on the Dillon targets isn't returning a lot. The Jones targets is from an EPA perspective. Jones been a great receiver, but because all this stuff is developing behind the line, it's all right. The really good players are the ones that end with 8 yards. We need to get more explosive. We need to find room down the field. LaFleur knows it. They're scheming up, man coverage, go, slot fades. This is what we need. Rodgers knows it. The second he sees it, he wants to hit it. In terms of throws beyond the line of scrimmage, outside of the numbers, he's completed throws to Lazard and to Cobb. Where's Doubs? Where's Watson? They haven't found the connection. And the Patriots drop touchdown from Dobbs was so close to just there it is. We got one. And then he hits the ground and it's out. It's so close. Offensively, I think they're going to be fine. Rodgers is too talented. LaFleur's too talented. The line is good, especially if Bakhtiari's back and they can move Jenkins into guard, which probably needs to happen. There's enough that they can do there that the offense, which is currently above average DVOA, above average EPA per play, I think it'll be okay, but you are in a condensed space. It's not like the defense where everything feels dumb. This, we should be able to solve this. The offense is everything feels tight. It's condensed. Just the margins for error are so much smaller than there were. There's no more, 3rd and 8, press the big red Devontae Adams back shoulder button. It's just not there anymore. So your margins for error are a lot smaller. They'll probably still be okay. Bell cow Aaron Jones is going to solve a lot of problems for them. Pre-snap Aaron Rodgers is going to solve a lot of problems for them. They'll be all right. But when you lose Devontae and you lose MVS, things get tight, things get trickier, and it becomes a lot harder to be that MVP caliber offense you were the last couple of years.
Yeah, they're going through clearly a transition offensively. When you've just got a literal cheat code on the side of the field with Devontae, who can get open against any coverage, and you can go to him in case of emergency break glass sort of situation, and he's just going to figure it out. That makes things relatively easy. And you pointed out in the article too of a lot of things that they did to get into solid situations where then they can get Adams on those plays. But with no MVS on the outside, with no Adam, MVS opening up the middle of the field and then Adams having to constantly be aware, a lot of times safety over the top, double coverage, etc. It just makes everything so much more complicated and so much more difficult. I thought there were opportunities for Romeo Doubs deep this past week. He shows that he can win. It's not necessarily consistently enough. As you mentioned, he had the drop against the Patriots in the end zone. But you look at this offense so far, every one of their touchdowns is it's 8 to 10 play drives. There's no explosive, everything. And I mentioned this even going back to last year when they had Devontae and MVS. So many of their touchdown drives were 12 plays, 15 plays, 11 plays, and it was just a grind. And now you're seeing that even more without those two playmakers. And it just feels like even if you want to be a horizontal team, and even if you want to be able to stretch the field that way, at some point you've got to have a guy that can get the ball in their hands and take it to the length of the field. You've got to have some sort of explosive playmaker. Lazard's not that. Cobb's not that.
Yeah.
Dobbs, like there's pieces of it, but he's averaging under 10 yards per catch right now. Like, so that's not it. Watson hasn't developed in that. Dillon's not that. Jones can be, but you've got to actually get him the football, which has been an issue at times too. So there's a lot of questions that they have to answer right now.
Yeah, I'd like them to get Jones on more vertical stuff outside of the backfield. A lot of his route tree is just like flat stuff, and I think that there's ways you can get running back wheels or running back rail like up the seam, and just get some cheesy ways to get him some downfield catches, because like that might be the bottom of the barrel, but it's a little bit where you are. I think you'll feel good about Dobbs' ability to stretch the field and to catch downfield stuff by like week 9. Like it's almost there. And you're just really hoping you can get it off the ground before the schedule becomes tough. But I think they can. Like, I think I've seen enough from Dobbs preseason and regular season, and like Rodgers going back to him after the drop, that I think Rodgers is invested enough in what he's seen from him, and Dobbs has shown enough to the coaching staff that he's going to get there. Watson, I'm not so sure. But Dobbs, cool, great. The key point that you bring up there is, right, like, you want to be a horizontal stretch team. Let's look at the past horizontal stretch teams. Like, let's talk about, people have brought up the Niners and like the Shanahan influence on the floor. And can we bring more of like under center play action, point and shoot, Aaron Rodgers just kind of like quarterbacking the offense like a point guard? Yeah, you could do that. Like, I'm fairly certain that that's achievable. There's 2 issues. One, you got to convince Rodgers to do it, which just like, apropos of nothing, convincing Rodgers is a challenge that the Packers have been dealing with for years. Like, Rodgers has to be on board with things. That's been very well established by Aaron Rodgers now. So number 1, he's got to be on board with it. Maybe he will be, maybe he won't. I don't know. Number 2 is, okay, well, the way the Niners build it is that every single player who might catch the ball in their horizontal stretch stuff can break 3 tackles, right? Like, Jawan Jennings, wide receiver 3, took a hit like at point blank range from some Carolina defender. I don't remember who it was. And the guy just bounced off him. And Juwan just turns upfield and starts trucking. Like Debo, Ayuk, Kittle, Juszczyk. They all are so good after the catch. That's the way they built it. They knew they needed to be this because they knew what Jimmy was. That's not the way the Packers have built it. If you're like, all right, we're going to live in a yak world. We're going to live in horizontal stretch, quick game, throw over the middle, intermediate play action. And those targets are going to Lazard and Cobb. It's not going to work as well as it did for the 2017 Rams, as it did for the recent Niners, because those aren't yak bodies. What bodies are they? Cobb is like isolation routes, right? Lazard is like block, deep shot. And that's what they're trying to use those guys as right now. So you can try to shoehorn them in. I'm not sure you're going to get it. It'd be nice if like Christian Watson could be that. I'm not sure you're going to get that this season. So you have to fill in the gap some other way. And that's where like the Dobbs development becomes really important. Can we get Jones targets further downfield thing becomes really important, because if you're trying to live in a yak world and it's Lazard and Cobb as your starting receivers, you're going to be disappointed in the return on that investment.
Yeah, Sammy Watkins isn't solving that problem either when he comes back, unfortunately. Yeah. Well, let's end with this. Well, I will say that I think there's a piece of this offensively that reminds me of when Jordy went down with his ACL and they just didn't have the playmakers on the outside, and teams condensed the field and played a lot of single high press man, made sure they couldn't run the ball. There's a piece of that reminds me of this. And that was a very difficult transition for McCarthy and Rodgers at that point. But you've mentioned Dobbs. You've mentioned some of the things. Are there solutions available for the Packers? And I'll let you go in any direction, offensively, defensively, to become the team that maybe a lot of people expected them to be at the beginning of the season?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it is conditional on Rodgers and the way that he plays. Some of the deep shots are good. Some of them are just kind of like frustration heaves. We got to get rid of the heaves and stick more with the good stuff. I think Dobbs is going to get better week over week. I believe that, having watched him and seen him play. So I think that offensively, like I said, I think they're going to be fine. I think that you're going to start to see more Aaron Jones 15, 18, 20 carry games. I think you're going to see more, of the Dobbs downfield targets. The ADOT's going to go up. The yards per reception is going to go up. Get Sammy back, and I think you're fine. Their screen game, their RPO game is always going to be great. That's going to work for as long as LaFleur's there and Rodgers is flicking that thing. Like they're going to be okay. If they want to jump from where they are now, which is like good enough team in the NFC to probably make the playoffs. Oh, shoot, are the Vikings going to win the division? Can we even beat anybody in the playoffs sort of a team? To, oh, yeah, Packers. Packers are maybe the number 1 seed in the NFC. Packers might make a run. It's the defensive improvements that have to take place. That's where the biggest return on investment is. I was one of the many who came into the season were like, yeah, this is a chance to be the best defense. Because you just look at the depth chart. Holy smokes. They just got horses. Like, there's no reason it shouldn't be. And that, to me, is a difficult conversation between Matt LaFleur and Joe Barry, where it's like, hey, fix it. What you're doing isn't working, and you got to do something different. And there's as I talk about this in the piece a little bit, there's a humility there that's the tough thing to come by. Like, why don't coaches just run the right stuff? because you have to admit the stuff you've been doing is wrong. It's a lot easier to say the players aren't executing. Why don't you guys know how to exchange this route? First, because you coach us poorly. Secondly, we don't need to be here. We don't need to be in this world. There's a better world to be in. And that requires the coach changing the direction of the ship, admitting previously that he was wrong. It's a hard thing for coaches to do. It's a hard thing for all of us to do, but especially coaches who are at the highest level of their profession, a competitive profession. They're going to be self-confident guys, to say the very least. So if the Packers are going to jump in terms of like power rankings, in terms of like not needing overtime to beat Bailey Zappi and then losing to Daniel Jones in London, I think the offense can go from like 14th to 9th, 14th to 8th, but you're going to be limited because you lost Devontae and all that. Yeah. It's the defense that should be able to go from being below average to like a legitimate top 10 team. And defense is volatile. Like defense does change fast. And so if you can get things correct, both in terms of your coaching and your execution, and then also in terms of your schemes and how you run them, there's a lot that this defense can do to making the Packers a much better team. So that's the side of the ball that I'm more interested in watching the arc of over the next few months.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think everyone, in Packerland is realized that if this team wants to be a super successful team, there's a ways for the offense to click and have success, but it's up to the defense. The defense probably has to be great, or at least very close to great, if they want to ultimately be a legitimate contender come January. Ben, cannot thank you enough for taking the time today. Plug the article one more time and tell us where we can follow you on Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ringer NFL is the article, as Andy said, scheme, talent, no, yes, kind of that's the thing you Google and you'll find it. And then, yeah, I'm on Twitter at Benjamin Solak, Solak's SOLAK, Ringer NFL show. We're out here having a good time.
Guys, make sure to follow Ben. Make sure to check out the article. If you think some of the stuff that we went over today is like encompasses the article, it doesn't. It's just like the tip of the iceberg. Ben has stuff in there that you're going to want to sink your teeth into because it tells the full story. But super appreciative of the conversation today, Ben. Again, make sure to follow him on Twitter. You can follow the podcast at Packaday Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Again, at Benjamin Solak. That does it for us. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.